GM2 YouTube. I am back from vacation. I had a very lovely time on the beach. I had time to decompress, let my moldometer from Mocha go from here to like about here, a little bit better. And I even had time off stream to go and get myself a nice, humble 31 deep delve, which I've heard is actually wreck due to the fact I don't know how to read numbers that look like this, like 3 of them together. I don't really know. Can't count that high, so I'm just going to assume 31 is the best. It's got to be. There's been a lot of commotion around the new boss, the doom of Mocha. And there's some good, there's some very questionable, and there's some very, very bad. Before we get into the goods and bads of endgame content and bossing of old school RuneScape, let's first talk about the goods of the partner of this stream today, Apex Gaming PCs. Apex Gaming has been around a while, and I'm sure you've seen them around. All of us here are old school RuneScape nerds, but not all of us are PC building nerds. Sometimes you get faulty parts, forget to order something, or if you're tall like me, you're bending over a work desk to work on custom PCs and it kills your back and it makes you regret upgrading your PC in the first place. These Apex pre-builts, you're getting a lot of value if you aren't tech savvy or just too darn busy. With Apex Gaming PCs, you get a fully custom-built PC with the Bronze, Streamer, and Streamer Plus models. Bronze is your very average, everyday type PC. Maybe all you do is play old school, or you just want a PC to give your kids so they leave your PC alone. With the Streamer PC, you get more juice. And then finally, with Streamer Plus, you get the big chungus rig that will probably play most of your games, and you could probably do some nice editing with it as well. If there's a part you don't like or want something cheaper, or maybe you know how to build some but don't want to start from scratch, don't worry. You can customize parts with each of these models to suit your needs or aesthetics. There is a $5,000 US PC giveaway for those who sign up. Just follow the sign up process on the main pop-up. Thanks again, Apex Gaming PCs, for partnering for this video, and you can follow the links in the description below for your discount. And let's continue on with our pros and cons of endgame content in old school RuneScape. Overall, I do want to say I like the boss, but it reeks of the Toa effect where it's on the cusp of being the best content in the game, but it's held back by things that could get fixed, or it might be abandoned overall for them to start development on other content like Raids 4. I want to see future content be made as well as possible, so that's why we're making this video. I want to start off with all the positive I have to say about Mocha, and there actually is a good amount. Mocha is a very solid addition to the game that has some glaring flaws. For the most part, Mocha avoids most of the major pitfalls Yama ran into. I want to be as fair and unbiased in talking about Mocha as possible. Even if I'm not personally enjoying it a ton, there is a lot to love at this boss for different players. First, the time to complete is fair. The rares from Mocha are hard to get, but they're not an unreasonable grind like Nightmare or Corp. The rare drop rates seem totally fair for an endgame boss. Coliseum is a very similar difficulty piece of content, and the rares there are not only atrocious, I'm looking at you, Sunfire Armor, but also things like the Raulos are incredibly rare, requiring almost 70 clears on average, while also sucking to the point no one bothers on an Iron. The boss is actually very challenging. A lot of people were complaining that Yama was too easy, and while I thought it was a very solid boss fight mechanically, it also literally became my dividing line for endgame content. DT2 bosses are tougher than your typical mid-game boss like Vorkath, but still not quite what I would call endgame. Yama is as easy as endgame content gets for me, while still being endgame, with only the end of the fight providing very much challenge. While it's definitely a step above Vardorvis, it's not a massive leap. Mocha, on the other hand, is arguably tougher than Coliseum, and they didn't pull any punches post-launch. It stayed difficult, and they weren't willing to budge on that, which I respect a lot. They scrapped skip tokens. Originally, a reward was going to be a tradable token that would have let you skip through several of the early delves. I am very, very glad they ended up scrapping this. Part of what makes the fight difficult is having to actually get back up to those later caves once you die. If you can just skip through the majority of the early stuff, it would have been a lot easier. The early caves aren't too much of a slog because of the 100% accuracy and punish mechanic being fun. Mocha has mechanics that provide you 100% accuracy and also bonus melee damage depending on your strength bonus. This provides a lot of complexity into what gear you end up bringing, and it's totally different depending on what cave you are capable of getting to. We've seen the world record delvers bringing items like SGS, AGS2, Eldritch, Blowpipe specs, and everyone has been flipping back and forth between Masori and Void since launch. There is a solid argument to be made for bringing all of these different specs and gear sets. It's very rare to see much variety at any boss, and it adds a lot to endgame encounters when there are choices to be made. Demon Bane is not 120%, but it's still good. Another huge pitfall that Yama fell into was making Demon Bane far too good. Emberlight and Purging Staff both are comparable or outcompete their Mega Rare style counterpart, and as a result, very cheap weapons and spells are far stronger than they probably should be. If you've looked outside of Yama at all lately, you'll probably spot several bots running inside in Rag Mage gear with the Staff of the Dead. Bots simply mage camp with a staff that costs 8 mil GP until they reach the front of the high scores. I've spotted several with over 100 million magic XP purely from Yama. The progression is thrown out of whack due to the 120% Demon Bane, and luckily Mocha did not follow suit. Scobo is still an excellent weapon, but it's definitely worse than T-Bow by quite a decent margin. This leaves progression intact, and while it didn't stop bots, which we will get into why shortly, weapon upgrades are still really impactful here. Grub damage is cool. I love that we can turn the grub AoE against the boss and do a small amount of bonus damage. It isn't massively impactful or anything, but it feels good waiting for the grubs to line up and flicking prayers while landing a shot on that grub that was about to go in. Orb clearing. This was a perfect compromise on the acid being overbearing. Now to clear a small amount of acid, which very well may be the difference maker on getting another 10 caves, you have to survive the dreaded orb phase. This gives you an additional layer of complexity in lining up a good clear, while also doing the super difficult mechanic, so making it much more fair because you aren't forced to tank acid. This feels incredibly rewarding when you clear the entire melee range of Mocha with one well-placed orb special. This is reserved for basically the best players to interact with, and I am all for it. Car phase. I really love how this mechanic is shaken down, with people charting huge amounts of tiles that make this more manageable. They've designed the phase to allow prep on the earlier phase and make it consistently manageable, versus not prepping and dealing with a tougher later phase. Mechanical depth, complexity, risk reward, it's a great special attack. Not to mention that they give you 100% accuracy during this entire phase, allowing a bunch of unique and useful weapons and special attacks to take advantage of it. This is easily one of the top best mechanics of any boss. Generally, hotfixes have been gentle. While early on, car block was found and skipped the entirety of car phase for almost zero setup, Jagex, instead of making Mocha annihilate any rocks that go underneath her, simply made her destroy that center rock, allowing us to make use of the shockwave for a single shockwave, kept it interesting, and part of a greater setup while not completely cheesing the mechanic. Many hotfixes could have made the boss way too easy or too hard, and for the most part they kept fixes in line with Mocha's status as endgame. Diverse iron common loot. The loot table here is not completely alkables and has some solid useful items for irons. Dragon darts and cannonballs are both very welcome, as well as seeds, alks, splinters, and aether catalysts. Everything, with some exceptions which we will get to, on the table is pretty solid. You notice there is a lot of video left, and that's because I have a lot of complaints about different aspects of Mocha. I want to mention that the J-mods have been nothing but helpful, working extra hard even on their weekends to try and make the boss as good as it can be. I've personally talked with many of them on ways to fix or improve things, and the boss is definitely better for it. I value giving feedback because I want future updates to be better. The problems with Mocha are no individual mod's fault, but bosses like this in the future can be better, so let's just get into it. Mocha was advertised as an enrage boss, and it just blatantly isn't. Look up Telos or Archglacior from RS3 if you want to see what an enrage boss actually is. These have high scaling difficulty and kill streaks where loot is risked if you end up dying. Mocha does not get endlessly harder, and the drop rate is capped at Cave 9. This inherently makes the boss an endurance fight instead of getting much harder with each cave. We've seen this with people pushing record delves. Jacko and Wyatt are now bringing Eldritch Staff to upkeep the prayer requirements. It's mostly about making supplies go extra far and executing a preset strategy over and over. I can't help but feel like a boss like this would be much better if we could bank between fights, but still have to risk the compounding loot, making it less about supply conservation and more about pure skill and consistency. Enrage boss carries with it the implication that you need to make a hard choice between claiming your loot early on or continuing. And this boss does not have that whatsoever. Here is the loot from Cave 3's common loot pool, 44k. And here is the loot from Cave 9's common loot pool, a huge leap up to 57k. Now 44k for completing Cave 3 makes perfect sense and is totally fair. It's not very difficult and it has very simplistic mechanics. Now 13k more loot for completing Cave 9, one of the hardest encounters in the entire game, is completely laughable. A grotesque Guardian's KC, which is notorious for providing almost no loot, is 11k more per kill than this. At 68, we could just round that bad boy up to 69k. This is a screenshot of Jacko's loot screen on Cave 134 with a whopping 13 million GP. This is 3.5 hours of Mocha played at the absolute highest level, requiring insane skill. The expected value of 3.5 hours of Vorkath is 14.3 million GP, just directly a mil higher. Now I can already hear the comments, but Gnomonkey, isn't the loot really good? Yeah, the rares are incredibly valuable. Currently, Mocha sits as the best moneymaker in the game. Although it's starting to get really close to top with the value of the boots dropping, it probably won't be the best much longer. Cave 9's loot, when you look at just the rares, is 800k. When the average value of the rares is 15 times higher than the common loot, we start to see the problem. Never will the common loot get to an acceptable value where you don't then risk it for the next cave. And you basically never will get a drop and not choose to leave immediately. We don't have some trash rares like Sunfire armor, and we don't have any huge common loot rolls like Yama's rare 150 Onyx Bolt drop that might make you question staying or not. The only people that risk their rares are the people going for world record delve, because by the time you reach cave 125, you're at a 50% chance to receive a rare drop. These guys basically have to risk a rare to get wreck because it's almost certain they're going to receive one by the time they get it. When you end cave 17 with no brew left and 30 health, you might as well give it another shot because you're risking pennies for another decent shot at the rares. There is never a time you cash out the base loot before unique, which defeats the purpose of an enrage or risk reward style boss. In Colosseum, there are at least times when you get a lot of shards or maybe a piece of Sunfire, you had a shaky last wave, and maybe you want to cash out early. As someone who's done a lot of Oathplate acquisition contracts, the rush I got from risking an absurd amount of cash run after run at 90 mil per contract, completely lost on death for potential 600 mil GP an hour, these two bosses can't even be compared. There's such a huge gap between them. Even compared to something like Revenants, where you build up a lot of cash over time and you're at risk of getting killed at any moment, losing all of it, they seriously missed the ball on this. Mocha doesn't need guaranteed rares or anything crazy like that, but if the common loot was at least somewhat decent, I might feel something later into a run. Even for people in budget gear with smaller banks, I see a lot of people pushing as deep as possible and then dying until they get rares, completely disregarding the common loot. This entire loot system doesn't feel thought through, and it shows with how many different reward blogs we had. There was never a clear picture. Let's talk about how early you can get rares. The vast majority of KC in the game are the early waves. 85% of all cave clears are 6 and lower. About 40% are caves 1 and 2. Why are we dropping BIS items from caves 2 through 4, which are similar difficulty to Slayer bosses, and then wonder why we have a botting problem? The high scores only include cave 8 plus clears, and those are completely full of bots. I wonder how bad it would be if we could see earlier cave high scores. Not everything in the game needs to be CBT, and I'm not saying the drop should only be available at 8, but the early caves are very much so just to show you roughly how the boss goes and ramp up slowly to the true fight. Cave 6 as a baseline for loot makes so much more sense to me, as it's when the boss has full access to all available mechanics. They just aren't fully cranked to 11 yet. On 5 we get car phase introduced, but it does no shockwaves and only 2 dashes. It's still not the full boss fight. The pet here also is just so common for absolutely no reason. This is actually the same problem Yama had. Yama had a reasonable normal pet drop rate, but then they added pet contracts that made it a 1 in 100 per contract completion, even if you didn't risk the contract yourself. And you also get that contract back each kill. Yama pet is extremely cool with an emote button, and you need dialogue when you pick him up, but it feels a lot less special because it's so easy to get your hands on it. Mocha pet on the other hand is just twice as common as all of the rare drops, meaning you will have an expected 2 pet drops before you get an average of 3 rare drops. It actually totally makes sense why they did this. Pet hunters grind bosses a lot, so if you just make the pet super common, those people will just leave, and they don't bring too many drops into the game as a result. The problem is this just completely pushes pet hunters aside and turns the pet drop into a trash drop that you never want to see. I personally have 4 pets, and it's always an eye roll when you see another pet in the loot interface. This role also potentially replaces rare loot. As far as I know, we have yet to see anybody get a pet and an item in the same role. It feels really bad to see a pet drop, and it shouldn't be that way. This also might be the most prime example of lack of QA in an endgame boss I've ever seen, followed by over 20 hotfixes in the first few days, not an exaggeration, and following weeks. With each new hotfix, more issues showed up, and it was to the point that you couldn't tell what was intended, what was a bug or skill issue, to the point I quit the boss altogether. I couldn't even farm low-level waves on the hardcore for fear of a new bug that might get uncovered. I praised the gentle hotfixes earlier, but the bulk of these bugs should have been caught before release, and the hotfixes post-launch should have also been QA tested to avoid breaking further features on the boss. Repeatedly, grubs would just stall or not stall with each hotfix, causing them to go in even as you sent a killing shot at them. The big grubs also just didn't stall and required a hotfix as well. Many times a hotfix would cause shots to overlap, especially if you melee punish too quickly. And recently Jagex claimed this would just become a feature moving forward. Yeah, that's correct. They made it so no matter what your attack cooldown is, you can melee punish the boss when Mocha throws up the prayers, but if you end up using that to your advantage, you take guaranteed damage, and that is, quote, intended. Luckily, they at least made the prayers stack up with the correct style after a lot of pushback. Why does the boss go into a second shield phase after the massively difficult orb attack? It feels like if Muzpa decided to do a second smite phase, and if you didn't manage to kill it in 4 shots, it would make you do it all over again. Shield phase is not terrible inherently. It's a chance to heal, get back on your feet before the fight progresses, but a second one just slows the pace down even further if you didn't manage to kill the boss quickly enough. It also just makes it easier for record delvers, because like I said earlier, it's a free opportunity to use support specs and get back on your feet. Your punishment for not dealing enough damage to the boss is going through the orb attack, easily the hardest mechanic of the fight, and then doing another shield phase right after, which is pretty slow and fairly easy to deal with. Why? Holy water as a mechanic is utterly baffling. They add a mechanic intentionally so when you finish the boss off during melee punish, it heals you, restores prayer, and it clears a bunch of acid. Then people start to use it, find out it's bugged on Cave 9+, and it doesn't even proc. They decide to keep this as a feature because it would make later delves far too easy, which was totally the right decision, in my opinion, as people are easily getting to almost 200 without using it. People also found that if you don't attack the boss post orb phase, he won't start the shield phase, and you can potentially proc Holy Water that way on Cave 6 through 8. Jagex then changes it so Mocha will start the shield phase no matter what after it does about 3 attacks. That means if Mocha doesn't do a melee punish in these 3 attacks, GG's, enjoy your shield phase. So the overall breakdown is, people find ways to use the hidden mechanic the devs added, the devs feel it's too powerful, and nerf it by making it random if you can do it. Why did they even add this mechanic in the first place? Did they genuinely think no one would find ways to utilize it? Is it supposed to only be used if you get lucky? The dopamine, haha, cool, I got the thing to do the thing that heals me? If they thought that was the point of even adding it, it's an intentionally added mechanic they genuinely don't want people to use. Also, fun fact, this mechanic was completely bugged, so if the very first hit splat of your attack was not what killed Mocha, no Holy Water would proc. Size swing? No water. Chally spec? Huh, no water. Oh, a Godsword whack, but the Echo hit finished it off? No water. This felt like a very last minute addition that was not tested whatsoever. Acid as a mechanic is also just totally random. There's no way to influence the boss's spray of acid. The boss picks a direction and blasts acid that way every time it gets hit for the entire cave. Why didn't they copy a system like Healers at Zuck, where it places acid in your general area around your character like the fireballs do, or allow us to influence the direction to an extent by where we hit the boss? It also heavily dissuades the use of several different weapons. Anything with a multi-splat generates multiple bursts of acid, meaning Scythe, even though the boss is weak to it, generates triple the acid of a T-bow. Faster weapons like Blowpipe or even Scobo generate more acid than their slower counterparts. Thralls also generate acid every time they attack, making them nearly useless in the encounter. And with Thralls being useless, you might be wondering, well, should I bring Venge then? And the answer should be abso-fucking-lutely yes, you should. Unfortunately, they made it so the only attacks you can Venge through the fight are direct melee attacks and missed boulder prayers. Not the regular auto attacks, just the boulder attacks. What I and the majority of deep delvers do now is just skip Venge entirely because it wastes a slot, but you still walk in with Lunars, with Cure Me, and Spellbook Swap for just Death Charge. Why does Jagex hate Venge so much? There are so many bosses that are pointlessly immune to recoil or just simply don't recoil damage whatsoever, and now this boss is another to add to the pile. Looking at you, Nex. Everything about this boss screams bring Venge. For speedruns, it shoots a giant death laser that hits for 99. Surely you want to Venge that. Nope, you get no recoil damage from that attack. Sorry. They buffed the Arceus spellbook further with double death charge, and then they add an encounter that punishes Thrall usage, but just still can't Venge anything. Actually insane. The shield phase has an additional mechanic which makes absolutely no sense to me as well. If you saw my short one-shotting Mocha, this is what I'm talking about. There's a bonus hit splat a few seconds after finishing shield phase for around 20 to 30 damage. This can be increased the longer the shield phase took. They forgot to cap this, so I made that shield phase take as long as possible, at around 15 minutes in order to one-shot Mocha. They added a cap to this damage of 50, which you hit after roughly 90 seconds in shield phase. My question is, why the hell did they add this? It's a reward for doing a phase worse. Not not killing grubs next to the boss, doing less damage, using worse weapons, being unpotted, being brewed down. Why doesn't it reward snappier, better play like every other mechanic in the game does? Maybe hitting every grub next to Mocha gives you some bonus damage, or maybe hitting the grubs very close to the center of Mocha to finish gives you a boost. Instead, they add a mechanic where you are encouraged to milk extra death charges and drag out the fight as long as possible to get an edge later in the fight. Mocha also just simply does a ludicrous amount of damage rapidly, which I really dislike as a way to make something more difficult. Awakened Leviathan Enrage has less DPS than Mocha's boulders on Cave 8, a boss that is made to be completed for a cosmetic as a pure showcase of skill and harder than almost all other content in the game. Why can Mocha's flurry of attacks hit as high as 65? Verzik's melee attack in Phase 3 is even lower than this at 63, and that can be blocked with defense. Oh, did I forget to mention that? Yeah, all of Mocha's boulder prayer attacks can punch right through defense for guaranteed damage on any off prayer, as if it wasn't punishing enough. The laser attack makes sense because it's a huge attack that you have to really mess up to get hit by. The boulders are just ridiculous though. It makes me wonder if this is how hard content is going to be designed in the future. I seriously miss the days of death by 1,000 cuts in a solo tob in the Nilo room, where mistakes add up slowly and can cause you to get killed overall, but nothing is shooting death beam flurries of auto attacks at you that rip your health from 121 to 0 in 2 game ticks. One-shot mechanics in endgame content is an artificial and less mechanically interesting way to add difficulty. When you die instantly, food becomes basically useless because you can't recover your health anymore and you'll just die instantly. There is no going to low HP and recovering with a sick redemption combo eat like I have all the time in Inferno speedruns. Generally, my favorite bosses in the game don't have a ton of mechanics like this. A good example is all of the Toa bosses, chock full of one-shots. Baba Boulder Toss? At a high level, that's 110 damage. Oh, Akka DPS check? 80 damage. Arcane Scarab Blast off prey? Just 140 damage. Meanwhile, in Tob, Verzik at worst can hit you with a magic attack on P1 that can be entirely safe by just camping Mage Prayer. Her melee attack hits for 63, all of her auto attacks are 33 damage. It makes it feel way fairer, and like it's your fault when you died to something. You never die to bosses like Akka or Kefri because you ran out of food, it's always because your entire health bar got dropped in an instant. One-shots remove complexity, they don't add to it. The Mocha release was very rocky compared to Yama. We're not going to talk about contracts. The boss had multiple mechanics simply not work properly at all. The world record on the board for 1 through 8 was completely wrong and it needed to be wiped. The boss's cave entrance for the next floor literally didn't appear for people on day 1. The orb mechanic was a complete mess. It didn't protect you from acid and it had no leeway, meaning you took shockwaves constantly trying to keep up with it. Damage from boulders continued after the boss died even though it wasn't supposed to. The boss healing to full health after hitting you with a melee punish laser was later confirmed to be a bug, which we didn't think was. Mocha still instant melees you with no windup or animation out of shield and orb phase. I feel like we're starting to look at the Toa flaw list again. It's frustrating. I'm not blaming any devs on this, but Mocha needed more time to cook, and it was showing months before release with the reward blogs. Jagex struggles to test content at its hardest difficulty, and we saw that especially with Yama contracts. I know for sure these were not tested, when literally 2 of them were impossible. Now we are seeing it with very deep delve Mocha, where a bunch of issues crop up that are only encountered when good players are capable of getting to them. The boss was so buggy that I got frustrated and left to do random chores on my hardcore. I didn't want to risk my hardcore there because what if they added a bug that I didn't know about after a hotfix they deployed? And they don't refund status even for their own mistakes. I repeatedly while grinding Mocha questioned if I was even allowed to use tech that we found because it was so utterly broken. Initial car park cheesing the entirety of car phase was a tough call for me, and it ended up creating a dividing line between the people that are too good to use the cheese and people using every tool at their disposal, only to end in it getting soft patched. T-bow attack speed can be sped up by throwing knives at grubs to get 3-tick bow shots. Initially, after contacting JMods about it, I was told not to use it, and I kept it under wraps on stream until someone made a Reddit post about it, and then it was completely public. Now that feature isn't even patched, and actually it's just totally fine to use, so go ahead and use it. Why is the player base being forced to walk on eggshells as they QA test bosses that should have been tested thoroughly already? I don't think Mocha at its core can be fixed to the point where I personally would enjoy grinding it at a high level. The boss works well for Ks 1 through 8, but I can't see myself going for the furthest delve or any speedruns. It's awesome to see players like Wide and Jacko push the content to its limits, working with Muffin and other people in chat to find tech and help these guys push even further, but I think finding tech for me is where my enjoyment ends. The majority of the changes I would suggest would vastly change mechanics to the point it would basically be an entirely new boss. I would change the randomness of acid, the shield phase instead rewarding you for clearing grubs quickly instead of milking. I would drastically rework the orb phase because it just doesn't feel good, maybe making the orbs spawn instantly on firing your second shot, as well as longer windup from the boss's shockwaves would go a long ways. I probably wouldn't even throw 2 rocks at people in Cave 8 because 1 feels plenty fair enough. I also absolutely would remove second shield phase and simply make the boss do his normal attack pattern for the beginning of the fight until killed. I hope moving forward from Mocha they have taken solid notes from this boss release and have a better understanding of what does and doesn't work. I'm really concerned about CAs, and I don't see how they can possibly be interesting with how the boss is designed currently. Overall, I still do really like Mocha, even with all of these paragraphs of criticism. Jagex seems to have a very hard time pushing content into higher difficulties, relying on things like one-shots and DPS checks for difficulty instead of adding mechanical depth. It shows with content like high raid level Toa, Yama contracts, and now Deep Delve Mocha. I really hope we see some more creativity at Raids 4 with help from the community on the feedback side before release. If you're wondering why I didn't play test Mocha, I was offered, but they bar you from streaming content until someone clears it, which is unfortunately just a huge income hit, especially at a boss that's as hard to get a first clear on as Mocha. Chasing for world's first is something I really enjoy, so I probably won't playtest most content early, but I do try to give feedback wherever I can on public news posts. I seriously appreciate the JMods popping into different people's chats to collect feedback and also just enjoying the boss themselves. I had a great time crashing out about the bugs with my friend Nox in the chat, and they do really work hard to try to improve content even on their weekends. I think this time Mocha was a little too rough around the edges though, for even all of that extra attention to perfectly smooth out. I am not doomsaying at all about future content. I genuinely believe we are in old school's golden age, and I don't see why that can't continue with further improvement and feedback into the future. Raids 4 will be amazing, I have no doubt, and small mistakes made in these high-level bosses could give the devs a chance to make it even more amazing. I love that we are starting to see a lot of high-level updates. Yama and Mocha coming out so close together was a really big breath of fresh air, and I hope we continue to see more consistent high-level bosses in the future. And that's it for the video. Leave a like if you liked it, and/or subscribe.